Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do a complete mindset shift on how you view the people closest to you. We're looking at the full analysis of the hidden, structured frameworks that are actually driving our personal connections. We usually think of our relationships, family, friends, partners, as these purely organic, emotional things that just sort of happen to us naturally. But what if we looked at them through the lens of systems thinking? What if there's a highly structured, almost legalistic foundation sitting right beneath the surface of your deepest emotional bonds? Today, we're breaking down an incredibly fascinating analysis from the Quiet Analyst that completely strips away the romance and looks at the underlying architecture of human connection. We are going to pull back the curtain on why some relationships thrive effortlessly while others just feel like a constant, exhausting uphill battle. All right, let's jump right in. Relationship is a contract. Okay, I know, it sounds a little cold at first glance, right? We don't usually sit down with a friend over coffee, bust out our lawyers, and sign on the dotted line before ordering a latte. But the premise here is that relationships aren't just driven by spontaneous emotion. They're actually binding agreements. Whether they're unspoken, like those silent rules you definitely have with your siblings, or explicit, like traditional marriage vows, every single time you enter into a relationship with someone, you are entering into a contract. And just like a business agreement or signing a lease on an apartment, these personal contracts are built entirely on the expectation that certain conditions are going to be met. I mean, if you sign a lease and stop paying rent, you get evicted. In our personal lives, that eviction just looks like a sudden falling out or a slow fade of intimacy. Section 1. The contract paradigm. Let's explore mutual rights and obligations. So, once we accept the premise that a relationship actually is a contract, the very next logical step is to figure out the terms. Every single relationship, from your most casual friendship to your deepest family bond, operates on a specific system. There's always a give and a take. You have a set of rights you're entitled to and a set of obligations you are absolutely expected to fulfill. Let's look at what those terms actually look like in practice. In the husband and wife marriage contract, the source points out that across most traditions, this involves mutual obligations like respect and honor, with roles usually divided into providing and nurturing. In the parent-child blood contract, parents are expected to protect and fulfill needs, while children are expected to obey. And think about friendship. We expect our friends to help us when we're in trouble and to keep our secrets. Even in the teacher-student dynamic, there's a clear expectation to teach on one side and to respect and obey on the other. Think about that one for a second. A teacher promises to deliver knowledge, but that contract completely fails if the student doesn't fulfill their duty to respect the learning environment and actively listen. So the crucial takeaway here is this. Under this paradigm, a good friend, parent, or spouse is quite simply defined as someone who fulfills their side of the contract to the best of their capabilities. It's all about execution. It's not just about having warm feelings towards someone. It's about consistently delivering on the invisible obligations you agreed to. Section 2. The Affinity Trap. Time spent versus true friendship. Now, this is where things get super practical, because this is a trap literally almost all of us fall into. We have this major complication in how we evaluate our contracts, especially when it comes to our friendships. We very dangerously confuse the sheer volume of time spent with someone with actual loyal friendship. To really understand this trap, we gotta define what's actually happening. The source defines affinity as a connection based purely on common interests. Maybe you play Call of Duty for 5 hours a day with someone, or you binge the exact same true crime shows every single weekend. Because you have those overlapping interests, you naturally have a really high affinity for one another, and you end up spending a massive amount of time together. But here's the wake-up call. Having a lot in common absolutely does not mean they are fulfilling the actual friendship contract. Affinity is just shared hobbies. It is not shared loyalty. Just because someone enjoys the exact same distractions as you, well, that doesn't mean they're actually committed to your well-being. Let's really drive this point home by comparing the two. On one side, you have the affinity trap. Think of that guy you have an absolute blast with at the bar every Friday night. You laugh for hours, you watch the game together. It feels amazing. But the literal second you leave the room, he's gossiping about you. And when you are actually in a bind, he magically stops answering your texts. That is pure affinity with zero loyalty. They completely broke the contract. On the other side, think about true friendship. Think of, say, a childhood friend. You might only text twice a year, you live in totally different states, and maybe you don't even have the same hobbies anymore. But if your car breaks down at 2 a.m., they are the one picking up the phone and figuring out how to help you. They are honoring the contract. This really challenges us to critically evaluate our own circles. Honestly ask yourself, are the people you spend the most time with actually holding up their end of the bargain, or are they just fun companions occupying your time? Section 3. The emotional bank account. How we track your relationship balance. So now that we know what the contract is, how on earth do we measure it? Well, the source borrows an incredible operational metaphor, originally from Stephen Covey's famous Seven Habits book, and it gives us this very tangible, almost mathematical way to measure the daily health of our relationship contracts. So, what exactly is an emotional bank account? It's a shared account between the two parties in any relationship. Just like your checking account at the bank, it has a running balance. But instead of money, the overall balance represents the level of trust between you and that other person. And here's the kicker. Every single interaction you have in your relationship is a transaction within this shared emotional account. Every text message you send, every time you roll your eyes in conversation, every time you show up late, you are processing a transaction. Literally, nothing is neutral. You are always constantly either adding to the balance or taking away from it. Let's break those transactions down. Deposits happen when you are actively fulfilling your side of the contract. You show up to help them move apartments on a Saturday morning, massive deposit. You keep a secret, you show them genuine respect in public, deposit. Now, withdrawals happen when you break your side of the contract. You lie about why you were late, withdrawal. You neglect an obligation or you disrespect the other person in front of their friends, huge withdrawal. And here is why this is absolutely crucial. Because it's a shared account, if one person is constantly making deposits while the other person is only ever making withdrawals, that relationship is mathematically destined to go bankrupt. One person gets totally drained, the trust zeroes out, and the account is closed. It simply cannot survive under those conditions. And that brings us to the core equation of this whole framework. Balance equals trust. The ultimate baseline of any relationship contract is trust, and that trust is not a static thing. It fluctuates up and down, day by day, hour by hour, based entirely on your history of deposits and withdrawals. If your balance is high, your trust is high. If your balance is in the red, your trust is gone. Trust isn't some magical aura that just exists. It is the strict mathematical sum of your historical behavior. If you spend years making continuous withdrawals, you can't just expect a high trust balance simply because you said, "I'm sorry" once. Actually rebuilding trust means you have to go back in and methodically make deposit after deposit after deposit until that balance is restored. To really see how this builds into the daily reality of your relationships, let's look at this brilliant concept of the interest rate. When you have a low trust balance, your relationship has an incredibly high interest rate. What does that mean? Well, it means small mistakes are suddenly taken as major catastrophic problems. You are basically walking on emotional landmines. Let's say you forget to buy milk on the way home. With a high interest rate, suddenly that tiny mistake turns into a screaming match about how you never care about the family, you don't listen, and you're totally unreliable. Everything is an argument. But look at the inverse. When you've built a high trust balance through consistent deposits, your interest rate is low. Small mistakes are just overlooked. You forget the milk and they just laugh and say, "No worries, we'll grab it tomorrow." That is the grace of a high trust balance. It gives you the necessary room to actually be human and make small errors without severely damaging your overall trust. Section 4. The macro system. Exploring how government impacts trust. So, we've talked deeply about the individual, one-on-one level of the contract. But the source introduces a fascinating systems thinking argument here about how massive, third-party macro systems actually alter the foundation of these highly personal contracts before we even sign them. Let's walk through the logic of this analysis. When two people sign a business contract, they have trust because there's a third party, the government, ready to enforce that contract. If someone breaches it, there's a safety net. Well, the source argues that this dynamic applies to family structures as well. In a marriage, the government acts as that third party through its laws. The analysis suggests that if a macro system has marriage laws that make breaking the contract, like divorce or cheating, structurally easy and relatively consequence-free, the overall confidence and security in the marriage contract is inherently lowered right from the jump. External guardrails directly influence internal security. Consequently, according to this framework, the baseline trust between two partners actually drops from the very start simply because the overarching system doesn't rigidly enforce the terms. It's a really compelling look at how external rules can deeply shape our internal, personal confidence. All right, so we've decoded the hidden structure today. We've seen that relationships are actually contracts built on mutual obligations. We've learned to spot the critical difference between mere affinity and true, loyal friendship. And we visualized our daily interactions as deposits and withdrawals in an emotional bank account. where the balance is pure trust. Now it's time to audit your own life. Look at your most important relationship right now. Are you operating in the green, or are you teetering on the verge of emotional bankruptcy? Take a hard look at your balance today and figure out what you need to do to fix it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to go out there and fulfill your side of the contract.